Welcome to Fox News. This is the last series I did. Well, the first series that I did, I was calling this whole thing Taste the Robot. Name change. It's Fox News now. So this whole next series is going to be talking about some Karl Marx stuff. It might just be a 2-video series. I'm not exactly sure how far I'm going to go with this one because it might only be worth 2 videos. But I'm going to start with the value of a commodity. Really, Karl Marx's labor theory of value kind of stuff. If you don't know what that is, it's really just explaining payment or wage labor, or at least the first chapter. It's like explaining wage labor under capitalism and how people are exploited and whatnot. It goes in deep. He takes a pretty Hegelian approach where he doesn't really show you the conclusion to start off. He really wants you to read the whole damn thing, but really I've only gotten into like the whole first chapter, and then the stuff he talks about way later in the book, which I'll get to. That's going to be probably the next video, depending on any conclusions I reach with this video or if anything pops up. But I'm probably just going to talk about primitive accumulation shit next. But first off, I'm going to be talking about, Karl Marx's labor theory of value shit. So, really, there's this ongoing argument between capitalists and socialists, and that argument is about how much people are paid in the workplace. And many individuals who are pro-capitalist will say that people who work in fast food don't deserve to be paid like a living wage, like they deserve to be like living on the streets or something, and that's ridiculous. A lot of them will say like $7.25 an hour is like livable. It's absolutely not. $7.25 per hour is provably not livable in every state in the United States. I can't remember where I got that one from, but I mean it's pretty apparent at this point. McDonald's put out this chart a couple of years ago, like 6 years ago, giving people like a budget of like, I can't remember how much it was, but it was goddamn ridiculous. You can look it up. It's out there. The Guardian posted it back in like 2013. But yeah, if you're a worker on the bottom rung of the power ladder, you'll likely produce much more than you're being paid. This doesn't matter whether your work is skilled or unskilled. Your fixed wage will never be equal to the exact worth of your labor. People can slack off at work for an hour, get free X dollars per hour. People always get paid the same, whether they're utilizing, every bone in their body or if they're sleeping in the bathroom. Workers get paid in wage form instead of receiving an equivalent or even a fraction of what they produce. And the reason they get paid in a fixed wage that is less than their production is because the owners of the company or the factory or whatever, they don't produce nearly as much as they're paid. The owners of the company they're exploiting their workers. There's no other explanation for it. And there's arguments against this. There's been a shit ton of arguments against this in the past nearly couple hundred years. But I'm just going to explain Karl Marx's original argument from chapter 1 to start off, and I'll get off to countering those arguments against it later on. So to make things clear, in a capitalist system, nobody is stopping anybody from going downtown or renting a place and starting a co-op. And these worker-friendly companies they just have less chance of survival in this mode of production, in capitalist mode of production, because a company with the motive of maximizing profits will logically invest in what makes money instead of worker well-being. True freedom in the workplace, it's just not too common unless you're a CEO. So let's break it down even further in a manner Karl Marx once did. Karl saw money that was made from the capitalist system as the product of a vast accumulation of commodities, with its basic unit being a single commodity. A commodity to him was made of a physical form and a value form. That's on page 1. The physical form is what you see in front of you, and the value form is made of two non-physical factors. Its use value and its exchange value, he just calls it value in the beginning, but he elaborates on that and calls it exchange value. If you hear value, that's exchange value. The commodity's use value, though, is simply the uses that a commodity has. This is purely a qualitative description. And the commodity's exchange value is the quantitative description, represented by being equated to other commodities of a certain amount, or even described by a central commodity or a money form. Labor has the same twofold nature, too. And that's abstract and concrete labor. The concrete form of labor is described as the unique work which is put into making a specific commodity or service performed, whereas abstract labor is described as human labor in general, which produces any and all commodities and services. Exchanging commodities and deciding their worth based on other commodities, quote, exchange value abstracts a commodity's use value, as well as the special qualities of the labor embodied. Each commodity's specific use value is being taken out of the equation because those participating in the market are assuming that useful qualities in commodities can be equated to others and then quantified, but they really can't, honestly. The free market, instead of the laborer, is deciding what a worker's labor, as well as a specific item, is worth. It's no longer two people engaging in trade in a social manner when you're talking about capitalism. Instead, a commodity is worth X out of Y because a certain amount of another item is also worth Z out of Y, or because the market, fluctuated. The value changes are no longer solely dictated by a change in the labor process or social interaction between buyers and sellers. Like, it can be, but it's not, only. Marx says the two commodities must have different qualities in both use value and labor, or else there's no point in trading them. So it's hard. It's a hard bridge to cross when running an economy through a barter system. The two commodities' values must not be equated because there's no honest way to do that. It would mean saying oranges have the same qualities as an apple, just reduced or magnified, which makes no sense for obvious reasons. An orange has a sort of skin that's tough and difficult to peel with your fingers. It's orange. You get the idea. To say someone can trade, deciding which particular item is worth more of a third dual equivalent form, is ridiculous. And for one to attempt this is nonsensical or incoherent. As Marx put it in Capital, Volume 1, Chapter 1, Section 3, here's a long-ass quote from Marx, page 35. Whether 20 yards of linen equals 1 coat, or equals 20 coats, or equals X coats, That is, whether a given quantity of linen is worth few or many coats. Every such statement implies that the linen and coats, as magnitudes of value, are expressions of the same unit, things of the same kind. Linen equals coat is the basis of the equation, but the two commodities whose identity of quality is thus assumed do not play the same part. It is only the value of the linen that is expressed. And how? By its reference to the coat as its equivalent, as something that can be exchanged for it. In this relation, the coat is the mode of existence of value, is value embodied, for only as such is it the same as the linen. On the other hand, the linen's own value comes to the front, receives independent expression, for it is only as being value that it is comparable with the coat as a thing of equal value or exchangeable with the coat. To borrow an illustration from chemistry, butyric acid is a different substance from propylformate, yet both are made up of the same chemical substances, carbon, C, hydrogen H, and oxygen O. And that too, in like proportions, namely C4H8O2. If we now equate butyric acid to propylformate, then in the first place, propylformate would be, in this relation, merely a form of existence of C4H8O2. And in the second place, we should be stating that butyric acid is also consists of C4H8O2. And therefore, by thus equating the two substances, expression would be given to their chemical composition, while their different physical forms would be neglected. End quote. If the coat equals 20 yards of linen, yet the commodities consist of completely different physical makeups, then how can a coat really be equal to 20 yards of linen? They can't be. Yet they may be equated when considering their value expression in dollars. The two commodities are also being produced qualitatively or using qualitatively different forms of labor. There must be some sort of compromise or lapse of reason to result in their assumed equality, because they are not truly equal in value or use value, nor are they equal in the quality of labor performed. And why is this abstraction harmful when under a capitalist mode of production? Because it can socially erase the idea of a product's use value and the preceding concrete labor. It can distort a product's worth to a worker and is easily modified in ways more preferable to a bourgeois capitalist. A worker can forget their production's worth and believe they're getting paid, what may be justified. Because when only considering exchange value and abstract labor, they will never be able to find out the true worth of their labor. The true worth of one's labor is what they produce, and it is so often that the surplus value of the production is taken out of the hands of the worker and handed over to the capitalist class. Workers should strive for being compensated only for their production and not what they rent out their labor for, which is hourly wages. They should be entitled to either the full market price of what is produced or none less than what is decided between the producer and the consumer, not a third-party entity, and with few exceptions. That being like a state or something. A tailor knows what exactly took place when making the coat, and a weaver knows exactly what events took place when making the linen cloth. A worker will look for the forms of useful labor that went into making their product, and a free market is an unconscious entity and holds no regard for the worker, causing prices to be as social as it has to be for workers to shut up. Marx proceeds with his argument with the idea that without an immaterial entity controlling trade, the value of one's labor can only be altered if the two traders agree that the labor has intensified eased up or changed in kind. The impossible equality of the two commodities is at least addressed. So he has this kind of like imaginary scenario taking place, and it kind of goes against what Engels says when Engels suggests that a state take control of production, representing the workers. And to be fair, I mean, Marx's imaginary kind of like scenario is imaginary because there's never been a worker state in which this really took place. It would be a market, and well, it'd just be all co-ops. So I mean, that would be a little bit difficult. That's really communism. I mean, I guess it's not really communism because you would have money, but yeah, it was an imaginary kind of thing. He was really just going off of what was going on, like, I don't know, 50 years ago with simple commodity production when people would just trade things. Capitalist commodity production is what I just described. He says the social interaction, he doesn't say this, the social interaction should prevent an item's value from becoming so low that the worker's labor is no longer justly represented. And Marx believed that the only thing that could be of equivalent value to a worker's labor was the commodity that they produce. Therefore, they should own that commodity. This sentiment is in agreement with John Locke in his second treatise in Two Treatises of Government. And this is simply for anybody who sees the sentiment of owning your production as radical. And if you want to reference what he says, it's on page 111 of John Locke's treatise book. I got a quote right here, but I'm not going to read it. But yeah, there's this kind of debate between communists as to how production should go, what is socialist and what's not. So what I described is commodity production, whether you're going through like the worker interaction thing where they just trade things. What makes it a commodity after that, it's the fact that two workers are not according to a plan trading things, and then what is produced is going to be circulated in a market. What stops it from being a commodity is when you have it going according to a plan. And what I mean by a plan is a planned economy. You have resources being distributed according to an idea of where they should go. And that would make it not commodity production. Socialist or, so-called or maybe actual worker states, it's debated whether a worker state ever existed. But yeah, the USSR, places like the USSR had commodity production, but the USSR really had no markets, is the thing. But they produced commodities because they were reliant on trade from capitalist countries. They accepted that they lived in a capitalist world, and so they did this. And a lot of people will say things like they weren't socialist because there was commodity production. And some people will say, oh, they were socialist even if they did have some commodity production, because the general form of production, or the typical form of production, or the more common form of production, was not commodity production. It was according to a plan. And that made it socialist. And then other people will say things like, it wasn't a socialist mode of production if you had any commodity production at all, because commodity production is in essence anti-communist, and to have a socialist or workers' state, then you basically have to have a world revolution, and then you don't have to rely on like circulating your production, going in like a blind kind of circulation instead of, sending it according to a plan. But yeah, there's a shit ton of arguments in Left Book about this, and if you really ask me, I'm not 100% sure what I think, but right now where I am on this is I think you can be striving towards socialism and have commodity production. I'm not exactly sure if I would call it a socialist mode of production if you had commodities being produced, even if the value of the commodities being produced goes back towards the workers. I'm not exactly sure on that. All I know is at that point you're trying. So the USSR, at least at some points in time, were trying to be socialist. At least sometime before Khrushchev came in with the reforms and stuff. So at least during Stalin, there was socialist intentions. Shit. So the next video is going to be about investment, primitive accumulation. It's going to be in response to people that say things like, it's okay for the capitalist class to steal the surplus value from the worker because there are people that invest in the company and they deserve some like value coming back to them for their investment. They deserve to make it like a profit or like a passive income off of this risk that they took. And I just don't think that is I just don't think that's really fair. For one, I don't think private individuals should be responsible for this kind of stuff. I don't think they're trustworthy enough to really invest in what makes it may make like the company like rise in value, which is that's their goal. But I don't think their goal is to make workers' lives better, considering the people that own the most shares are the ones who elect the board of directors, and the board of directors are who are in charge of who runs the company. Who runs the company is in charge of deciding how the workers are paid. And so I think that's total bullshit. And I think if anyone's going to be investing in a company and getting it all sort of a share, it should be an entity that strives to make workers' lives better. And in my opinion, I think that entity should be a worker state. That's just my opinion. Other people will say things like, oh, the workers can invest. But to me, that is kind of the same as private individuals investing. Of course, it's different because I'll talk about it in the next video. They don't have like stolen property, and they don't have the stolen means of investing. They may not have been born with excessive amounts of wealth. I'll get to it in the next video. This is Fox News, everyone. Have a good one.